Welcome all to my conversation with a group of PhD students and bachelor students and MA students at the University of Bukarest. My friend and colleague Bogdan Minca, who's professor of philosophy in Bucharest, had invited me to hold a proseminar for these students who are interested in Heidegger. Sometimes some of them work on Heidegger actually. We had originally planned for me to fly to Bucharest to hold the proseminar, but then that became impossible, so we held it over Zoom, and we are in this conversation discussing the Freiburger Vorträge from Heidegger from I think 1957, and in this particular one we talk through the last talk of Heidegger, the fifth Vortrag from Freiburg, because I think it's the richest discussion that we had. So I'm uploading this, and again I'd like to thank Bogdan and his students. It's a bit of a heated discussion, as it's appropriate for academic philosophy. So I hope you enjoyed, and as always, feel free to subscribe, share the video, leave a comment, and support the channel in any way you can. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'll read this second paragraph. He says, as the signpost shows, thinking is our thinking, a thinking indebted to the tradition. As to what it is, this has long been defined by the Logos. To what extent is an essential relation to the abyss appropriate for a thinking so determined? Answer, insofar as thinking has the character of a founding. The answer sounds nonsensical. Mm-hmm.
Because the question arose a couple of times, of course, what is meant by thinking? And then it seems he gives a partial answer, but then immediately has to say that there's also something different about it. The first part of the answer is what?
Begründen, Logon Didanai.
In what sense? Sorry?
No, that was the question. I mean, you mean that the first answer would be begründen, so grounding for what is denken.
Yeah. But I think he also says here in the beginning, right, of this paragraph, wie der Wegweiser zeigt, ist das Denken unser, der Überlieferung verdanktes Denken. It's a thinking that owes itself to tradition. But then he says it's troublesome to think of it in this way, or maybe he doesn't say this, maybe I read it wrong, because thinking used to be a thinking in grounds, but now it's supposed to think in terms of an Abgrund, in terms of let's just say for now, an Abground, a non-ground. But then, yes, then the Logon Didanai comes in. Maybe we can say a bit more about this, but what do you make of this entire project here?
Well, I think the contradiction arises because the tradition let us know that thinking is connected intimately to Grund as Begründen, and I think this one has been made clear in the second conference on page 110 and 11. He speaks about Begründen, die Begründung und das Ergründen des Grundes und das Begründen des Satzes. And this is the Hauptzug des Denkens. This is the main character of thinking. Okay, and then Heidegger still says, yes, but perhaps more intimately than that, thinking is connected to Abgrund. Yeah, how should we translate Abgrund? What's your because abyss is offensichtlich. It's obviously it's a bad translation. So how would you translate Abgrund? So away from the ground, or? This is apo. This is ab in English.
Is it apo in Greek?
Yeah, it's the same root. Ab and apo. And ab in Latin. absentia, apeinai in Greek, or so. I think away in English is the same root, away. Well, I'm not sure. No, surely not. It's connected to way. But it should be that this a from away has something to do with it. I don't know.
Yeah, and also the spelling here is of course strange, right? The up hyphen Grund, both capital letters. I don't know, perhaps the withdrawing ground, perhaps. That makes sense. I don't know. Could be. I mean, to some degree, there must be. I mean, you know, a thinking that I'm not sure if a thinking without grounds, whether that's even possible. But perhaps what he's trying to achieve is a thinking that does not postulate a ground all too easily, and then operates with it. But maybe the withdrawing ground, the ground that is not permanent.
So you would say that Abgrund has a double eine Doppeltätigkeit, has something double in it. You have the ground, you still have the ground there, but it's, let's say, a genuine ground or an authentic ground, because by grounding it also shows that it has a withdrawing motion in it, that it yields, it gives ground. At the same time, it shelters its withdrawal. It's seine Geborgenheit. You know, it's that's how I understand it.
Yeah,
that's why it's the hyphen. The hyphen is, in a way, the giving and the withdrawing at the same time. That's why it's a difference here, because it's the ultimate difference of the ground and Abgrund at the same time. So it's not Abgrund is definitely not the absence of the ground. That's why abyss, the translation by abyss, is absolutely stupid, because it's the denying of the ground. The abyss is something you are falling into without end. Whereas this is not the fact. It's giving ground, and at the same time it's sheltering. I would say this is the primordial movement of the source, of the arche, of the origin. It's the Ursprungs, in a way, I would say. It's
Ursprung is an interesting word too, right? Ursprung is, it's source, yes, or origin, but Ursprung, if you really want to be very close to the German, it's the original spring, the original leap, the original springing up.
In this context, I was wondering if we couldn't think this ab in Abgrund from Absprung, because he mentions this jump, this leap on the basis of the ground.
Yeah, because Absprung, it's springing out from the ground, from away from the ground.
Exactly, away from the ground. So this
into
is
the
away from which.
So you have both territories in a way. You have the territory left behind, which is the ground, but at the same time you have the new territory, which is the withdrawal of the source in it. So you have both of them always. It's a kind. I think it's the same movement as in Aletheia. It's the same dynamic of Aletheia here that we have in Abgrund.
Or of the earth, perhaps. Of earth and the fourfold, which gives insofar as it retains itself, withholds itself. That's how earth gives. And again, Heraclitus, fragment of the Physis Cryptis Tai Philae, perhaps as well. So it's not a sheer abyss. Yes, but the ground. But can you, Alexandru, can you say a bit more on the Absprung and the Abgrund, perhaps, if you like?
Well, I was just referring. I can't recall exactly now in which. I think in the first or the second conference, he speaks about this jump that thinking performs, and this jumps. It's not a jump into an abyss, which it would only seem like that from the standpoint of metaphysics. And it is also not something contradictory in itself, but it jump, this saltus of thinking, on the basis of the ground. And in this jump on the basis of the ground, we reach the original, the incipient Begründung.
Mm-hmm.
So it is in this jump from the ground that we reach the original ground.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
And I was also thinking about the fact that most often the ground is actually was anwesend ist. What is anwesend?
Mm-hmm.
And when thinking comes to deal with its Grundsätze, then we are also in the Selbigkeit des Selbes. Then we are thinking about something that is not based on anything that is anwesend. So we're not dealing with a being in that sense.
Yes.
No, like when we say the road is long, then we are referring strictly to a being which presents itself to us, erscheint like this.
Because what has come up just very briefly, and then you may continue, of course, but the question was always, what's the standpoint? And to Heidegger, the standpoint of metaphysics is that it always begins with beings and then goes towards the beingness of beings, which then conflates with being. And his standpoint is being is, with a Y, das Sein, mit Y, and that's completely without beings, thought without beings, and then that which throws itself into the air, catches itself. But then from this, almost as he sometimes says, this piety of thinking, this simple thought, the wealth and the richness of the world arises. Would you want to say more, Alex?
Oh, well, that's it. Also, I have to think more about this. It's very interesting, but it's not very easily to grasp altogether.
Perhaps we could look a bit, if you like. I just have before myself the English version. In the Bremer Vorträge on page 49, which is 10 years earlier, Heidegger has a very, very dense passage about the interplay between the two, the Aletheia, the Verborgenheit and Unverborgenheit, and how they interplay. And perhaps I could read it. It's about 7 lines, if you like. It's as I said on page 49 in the German translation. It's on page 46 in the English one, and it goes like this. No, it's on page 47. So Aletheia, he says, sends itself into the lighting, sheltering of presencing. Oh, it sounds awful in English. It proceeds to unfold what presences into what is dispensational of its presencing. I go a few lines lower. So for Aletheia does not abolish lethe, unconcealment. Unconcealment does not consume concealment, but instead unconcealment constantly requires concealment, and in this way confirms it as the essential source of Aletheia. The latter, namely Aletheia, keeps to lethe and sustains itself in it. This, however, so decisively that even Aletheia itself as such, early on, falls back into concealment in favor of what presents as such. What presents assumes priority over that wherein alone it senses. So I think Heidegger tries to say how the Abgrund in the beginning is so powerful that it keeps Aletheia to himself in a way, the lethe. The lethe keeps to herself the Aletheia, and that's why then he says being the plurality of beings takes over. I quote again later. He says this, however, so decisively that even Aletheia itself as such early on falls back into concealment in favor of what presents it as such, namely beings. What presents it assumes priority over that wherein alone it senses, namely beings assume priority over being. For presencing, that is enduring and continuing here in the clearing of a worldly openness, can only essence insofar as unconcealment takes place, and so on. This has been a tremendous. I think this is the first time Heidegger speaks openly about these things. When he published when he said these things in 1949, Just I wanted to read it just in order to understand a bit what does Heidegger say that for metaphysics beings take over being. That is because inherently in this abgründige Bewegung, in this movement of the ground which withdraws, the unconcealment is taken back in a way. It is freed for the first time, and then it is taken back already. So that's why the pre-Socratics, in a way, just witnessed, just like a blitz, just like a lightning. It was a witness, and then it already withdrew. And so the Greeks were, in a way, attentive not anymore to the withdrawal movement, showing and withdrawing, but they were already interested in what showed itself in this lightning, and this was the plurality of beings. And so they started to develop metaphysics and to develop science and to ask themselves, what is the beings? What is the being of the beings? But they lost, in a way, the withdrawal movement in it. I mean, this is Heidegger's perspective.
Yeah, but perhaps for a reason, right? This loss, which is, let's say, structurally a necessity of being or Ereignis itself, insofar as which is almost just, almost an existential point to make. If the Abgrund as an abyss opens up, that's rather frightening, terrifying, and there's nothing to hold on to. But then probably, I'm not speaking all that systematically now, but the word, it probably a lot hinges on the word skole too, that we talked about yesterday. Right? Skole, which let's just keep it untranslated, because if we say the official English word, the imagination goes off somewhere else. Skole as that which arrives into the polis, and then by this arrival, the polis becomes a proper polis, and is no longer just focused on the immediacy of the everyday life, but can focus on mythologia, etc. And skole is that which gives hold. So finding a hold is the initial response, which we can only in hindsight, of course, say it crowds out lethe in aletheia, and I think the original unity is lost, but this loss is almost perhaps necessary, right? It's not a mistake, because it's only in this loss that you can regain, right? You're not as a self is not a thing, right? You're not becoming yourself by being something. You find yourself by, speaking the slogan, of course, but you find yourself by losing yourself, and perhaps that's a bit what's at stake here too. And I found very interesting that Alex pointed out the connection, that if anyone else has anything on this or something else, you can say something, is of Abgrund, Absprung, and Grundsätze. Right? So if the experience is this Abgrund, the withdrawing ground, let's just say the concealed side, then as soon as myth no longer holds sway, the thinking being has to setzen. It has to begin to posit about what something is, or else we're in chaos, sorry, in chaos, I think the Greeks say, which also means Abgrund, by the way.
Yeah, this is the etymological way of chasma, which is like yawning. This is the ha, just make like this. This is the sound. I mean, it's the primordial void.
Yeah.
Oh, I was wondering, just so it's more clear for me, can we talk about two types of concealment? In a way, we have concealment when we refer to particular things. I mean, for every thought, there is a concealment by way of which I can think that which I think of. And there is another type of concealment as general concealment. I mean, concealment as such, that instantiates every time I think about something. So, for example, one could say that there is the idea of concealment, and there is a particular or instantiated concealment whenever I think about something. There must be something that goes away from my sight. Is this a correct way of viewing it?
Yeah, I would think that that's appropriate. I would think, I would just add perhaps that the Leistung des Denkens, that what thinking achieves, is to bring this together, right? So in that sense, that, as we said, I think, was it this morning or yesterday, I forgot, that the one who participates in what Heidegger calls clearing, participates in it always, even if not feeling not concerned by it. So that if the thinking being participates in it in such a way that concealment is disregarded, then there is, almost as what you said, a double concealment, because then concealment is concealed from itself. And then, as you said something like, I think, concealment as such, yes, there's this original Verbergen, original or Bergung, which unfolds as Entbergen and Verbergen, which is called aletheia in Heidegger's thought, and that's always active or at work, and then hence it, because you could almost say, right, at least I've tried to, and I think Heidegger says it like, he has these weird things, because he says in Über den Anfang, das Sein ist der Tod. And that to me means Sein, being, is this utter concealment. So it moves as this utter self-withdrawal. He wants to think this complete withdrawal. And that's always at work. And then, of course, on top of it, if you like, let's speak for now in the language of being and time, on the ontic level, we also always have concealedness, which then is disclosed about things. Yeah. That was
So I asked this because what I was aiming at is a problem that Remus asked yesterday, but now I will formulate it in another way. I mean, there is a way in which phenomena manifest themselves, and that is by way of concealment, or there always is a concealment. So there is a proper way of manifestation for regular phenomena. But how does concealment as such manifest? I mean, every time something manifests, it manifests as something determinate. Yet in the concept, let's say, of concealment, the notion of concealment as such, are we to regard this as a non-tic phenomena, or how are we to understand the way concealment as such comes to the fore, comes to light? Is there another concealment that operates such that concealment can come to the fore? That is properly the question.
A very good question. Do anyone want to answer? I can try, but
well,
yeah.
Just a
yeah, please,
suggestion, not an answer, or I would complete the question, so to say. I would ask if concealment has only to do with thinking and with our stance. More precisely, if concealment in physis is one and the same with concealment in aletheia.
In physis, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. And now Alex, right?
Oh, thank you. I was just thinking that, so to say, a form of manifestation, so to say, of concealment could be thought of the Gestell, for example. Meaning that Gestell is a way in which being hides its essence. I mean, without this originary retreat of being's essence, we would never speak of Gestell as such. So Gestell, as he says in the Bremer Vorträge, as this Nachstellen. So it leads to the Verweigerung, to the refusal of the being's essence, so concealment. In this way, I would say that we see in the Gestell a sign of the original concealment in being.
And an original concealment that's not specifically appreciated in thought.
Yes, exactly.
And so to the question of Madalena, it has to do with thinking and how the thinking being responds to it. And that is, to Octavian's question, is then this is what Heidegger calls Ereignis. Entzug ist Ereignis, he says, in what is called thinking. That's the original concealment, which is Entzug, original withdrawal. That's to be thought. If this is not thought, it's still going to haunt us. It's what Bogdan said this morning, the reference to, or what François Fédier said. If an epoch does not know the nihil, the nothing, that doesn't mean the nothing is not prevalent or it doesn't sway. It still holds its power over us, negativity. And in Gestell, what Gestell conceals is the original unity, even more of concealment. But that doesn't mean that concealment disappears. It actually conceals world access so much, or actually makes it impossible. And Heidegger says somewhere, I'm sorry, I forgot where, dass der Mensch verbaut sich den Zugang zur Welt. Sich selbst verbauen, also, ich weiß nicht, wie man das auf Englisch sagen kann. I wouldn't even know how to put it,
Obstruct, perhaps, obstruct its own.
Yes, obstruct, but the bauen is important, right? Because we're building, we're still world building, but in such a way that we actually don't have access anymore to what Heidegger would call the fourfold. But yeah, it's I'm not sure if that's a satisfying answer, but Dr. Bogdan, maybe you, yeah.
Yeah, I just to clarify, because for me myself it's not so clear. I remember that in the Beiträge, as I said yesterday, Heidegger speaks about three ways of Gründen. So the first one is so Urgrund, it's Abgrund and Ungrund. Let's leave the Urgrund besides, but what Abgrund is I think a bit clear now after our discussion. This was withdrawal movement of the Grund. But what is the Ungrund? Because Ungrund, as I understood it, is this, let's say, this bad, in quotes, this bad side of the Gründen. No, this is what I think Heidegger calls in die Gefahr, no? So the peril. Because as he says on page 43, das Sein ist das Sein die Gefahr seines eigenen Wesens. So being harbors in itself its own peril. So it puts itself to peril, no? And then he says, das Sein ist in sich, aus sich, für sich die Gefahr schlechthin. So being is in itself, out of itself, for itself, the peril by itself, the pure peril. So this movement of putting itself to peril, I would say this is the Ungrund. He also, when he speaks about language, he says that language endangers itself. Okay, so this is this movement of coming forward, coming to the ground, coming to show itself, to give a ground, and at the same time, it by coming out and giving itself as a ground, and of course Abgründen. At the same time, it lets itself to become inauthentic, so that mankind falls into this trap in a way. I think this is Heidegger's view of it. Now that's what. But my question would be, do you think that Gestell, if Gestell is the Ungrund, is the Gefahr, is the utmost peril of this Gründen, does it begin exactly at the moment when the Greeks don't see the peril anymore? That is, the pure focusing on the Sein there. Is this already the beginning of the Gestell, or is it only in the modernity? That is, the Greeks still had a kind of intuition of the original difference, the ontological difference in a way, and so they faced the peril, but they didn't fall into the trap. Whereas in modernity, the trap is wide. We are, as you said, wir verbauen uns den Weg. So humanity has no access anymore to the ontological difference, and it is fully in nihilismus. That is, it thinks that mankind is the only being that thinks in a way that gives ground. The ground is purely subjectivity, so in full control. So how do you understand this? Is Gestell beginning already with the Greeks, or is it just now in modernity? It's, of course, Heidegger says that Stellen is already important by the Greeks. So the Greeks already understand the ground in a way of Stellen. Okay, it's a Legen, but I'm not always sure about all these things. So that's why I asked a bit.
I mean, I can try, but does anyone else want to answer or add to that?
Regarding the question if we can find the Gestalt in the Greeks, I think not Gestalt itself, but rather the movement that yields us the epoch as such, which now is Gestalt. And for the reason referring to the lectures from 49, Heidegger says that, of course, we don't have, we mustn't think the technology, the machine, as a better or a more performative utensil thing. Utensil, yeah. So what will be for the Greeks the thing? They would think the thing in terms of herstellen, of production, of making the thing.
Poiesis, yes.
Yes, and now, well, in modernity we think it as Vorstellen as Gegenstand.
Herausstellen.
Yeah, and now we think it as Gestalt. So there would be crucial differences that.
But it's still the same. This is my question in a way. It's the same realm of the Stellen, but it's not fully developed in a way.
I think there's two moments though, right? We have to be careful because then we become too historiographical and say, oh, it begins in 1492 when we discover America or something. But I think what at least two aspects. One of them is that, as he says here, truth becomes certainty. And that certainty is a very specific certainty. It's a certainty of the subject that makes itself absolutely certain of itself. And then the other crucial moment is you could almost say the forgetting of time in what's now called metaphysics. So that time plays no role, or is not thought of appropriately. And then actually when metaphysics comes to fulfillment or completion with Hegel, Heidegger says, and the book Being in Time became necessary because the concept in Hegel, the Begriff hat die Zeit getilgt, as Hegel says, it's cancelled out time. And the Greeks do not think time, according to Heidegger, appropriately because they think it linearly in terms of the flow of homogeneous now states. At least that's how it's taken on by the scholastics. And so Stellen is, what I would say is Stellen, like Sätzen, positing is absolutely necessary. Thinking must do so. If it doesn't, then it is back in myth and does not, it must posit. It must also find the ground, because if there's no ground, then it's hovering. It's in a mere abeyance. But there are things, again, we try to discover what those are. One of them is time that's been forgotten or not thought appropriately. And then the shift again, that truth is not revealedness, truth is not aletheia, which would be a unity of concealment, which also retains again something, sheltering and non-availability, non-controllability, non-engineerability, that it cannot be engineered, but that it becomes certainty, and not certainty in the sense now of maybe a medieval certainty of the goodness of God or the grace of God, but the certainty of the subject that it gives itself insofar as it thinks of itself, and that's the only thing, right, res cogitans, that it cannot question. And Heidegger would claim, this is what he always does, that no one can't, Fichte especially not even Hegel, no one overcomes the subject-object dichotomy, only Dasein does. So Gestell is always already, or Techne is always already necessary. It is necessary, or we need Techne. If not, then in techne, in the Greek sense, he has these examples of the stone bridge. It's bringing forth form and working with the stone itself, letting it shine forth something that's there or possible in it, and lingering in the stone in that sense. But then what Gestell does in this concentration, it operates with representation. And I think the other important notion that Alex, I think, brought up, the Nachstellen, which means to imitate, to chase after, and of course also to stalk, right? It has all these meanings in English. And that has to do again with, and he says this in the Was heißt denken lecture series on time, that the will to power, or the will to will, wants to, or is offended by time, and that the fact that time fleets by, and therefore it wants everything to repeat or recur eternally in the same way. And then you can understand this as the circular system of replaceability of everything, which is the cybernetic feedback loop now. But yeah, so in a nutshell, I think it begins early. It's necessary. If not, we find no hold. But with the move to truth as certainty, and other troubles that happen in modernity, which is, I don't know if Heidegger talks about this actually, the abolition of the telos by Francis Bacon, the explicit abolition of Aristotelian metaphysics. Explicitly, Bacon says we need to get rid of Aristotle. Was an impediment to science for 1,000 years, and need to get rid of him. He also writes a very interesting story called The New Atlantis, if you've not heard of it, where he talks about skyscrapers. He doesn't call it that, of course, skyscrapers and airplanes and what we would now call genetically modified food, and radio waves, more or less. It's a very weird text. But yes, so there are these moments in modernity which modernity is, and I don't know if Heidegger says this, but it's an explosion. And it's an explosion at every level. The cosmos explodes. There's a very good book by Alexander Quire. I don't know. Have you heard of him? Yeah? So, on from the closed world to the infinite universe. But so yeah. Anyone else?
If I may, first, just as a follow-up, I'd like to just quote 3 sentences from Die Gefahr. This is page 53 in German. And I find this play on Stellen and Setzen fabulously developed here. And it ties up very nice in this discussion. First would be this, Gestell ist die vollendete Vergessenheit der Wahrheit des Seins. So this, I think it's important to see that here is die vollendete Vergessenheit, so this complete forgetting of being. Then he also says, Welt sich verborgenerweise in das Gestell entsetzt. So this is the movement of the world which hides itself, and at the same time hiding of itself in the Gestell and its Welten. And then, apropos Nachstellen und Nachsetzen hier, der Gestalt zu setzen, setzt das Gestell der Wahrheit des Wesens des Seins mit der Vergessenheit nach. So I think this pretty much in frame, so to say, this context.
Yeah, thanks. So because, go on, sorry.
Just one idea. I think also in the Bremer Vorträge, Heidegger at some point speaks about the essential difference between the works of the peasant in the field, of the Greek peasant, for example, and the industrialization, the machinations, the machines of modernity. It's not just a difference in degree, that they're just more complicated, but they're essentially different than the pure work, simple work. Thanks.
Yeah, they come from another dimension almost, right? He has this notion of dimension, and perhaps then to qualify what I said before is that I would still say, you know, thesis has always been around. It's just that this utter concentration of the focus of what it means to be, or so, right? Trying out that fully appropriate. That's now located in what's called Gestell, and in Gestell utter forgetfulness reigns. In the sense of what? In the sense of die vollendete Vergessenheit der Wahrheit des Seins. I think this means the completed forgetfulness or oblivion of the truth of being means aletheia, I think, which means what's forgotten is the, again, original unity of unconcealment, concealment.
But could we come back to the questions of Madalena and Octavian, because I am not sure I understood if there was an answer, which the answer was. I'm sorry. I mean, in my head, they are different questions from what you kept on discussing, and I was wondering if we could go back a bit.
The problem of concealment.
Sorry?
To the problem of concealment, I said.
Yeah. And what did I say? Luca, what do you think? How would you answer it?
Well, I would say that they are different, but I'm really not an expert. So I was actually wondering if your discussion just now with Alex and Bogdan is an answer to what Octav and Madalena said, because I couldn't grasp the connection between the problem of types of concealment and your discussion. So I was just, it's just a clarification. How would you answer if the concealment in aletheia is different from the concealment in physis, or as Octav said, if you have two types of concealment, one more original than the other?
I think I was the person who, in a way, made the discussion drift a bit from what Octavian said with two types of concealment, and because I was thinking about Vergessenheit, about forgetting, and for Heidegger, there is an ontological forgetting, if we may say so. It's not only a ontic forgetting, but it mirrors the ontic dimension, because any forgetting, any ontical forgetting, is a forgetting of the fact that you are forgetting. It is it's necessary to any forgetting to not to know itself as forgetting. This is essential, because when you say I feel that I forget something, you don't really forget. You have to really not even think that you have forgotten something in order to really forget. And Heidegger, I think, brings this to also to an ontological level, in a way that through Gestell, we are at the vollendete Vergessenheit. This is the pure essence of forgetting, when you really never occurs to you the fact that you are forgetting something. This is the pure reign of Gestell. And
we forget forgetting.
Exactly. And we also
so I would say the cryptis die philae of physis, of which Heraclitus speaks, that's one way of articulating this original concealment, this original unity. As insofar that physis is that which grants and gives and is fruitful, but as herself likes to hide itself. By the way, we could be, I think the grammatical form is a medial form here, which is, so it's not self-reflective. So in English, it's completely impossible, right? Because to say I hide myself is turning myself into an object. Sich verstecken im Deutschen, in the German, is reflective but on the subject. But the medial form, and the Greeks, please correct me if I don't get it right. But I think it's the hiding in another, right? That's medial. It's not. It's related to itself, no. And then, however, shining forth in something else through this hiding, not itself stealing away. Is that more or less
I would say
going in the right direction?
As I would say, cryptist. I don't hear the reflexive either. I mean, it's hiding in its own interest in a way. I would say it's not the fact that it shelters that physis cryptist philei in order to conceal itself from somebody else. I would say it's just a kind of protecting itself. That's what I hear it. So nature tries to protect itself, to shelter itself, to offer, and by offering to preserve its source. That's how I hear this one.
But it hides itself in something else. So it's like the finest I, of which Heidegger speaks in paragraph 7a, I think, of being in time, is also a shining forth of something that shines forth in something else. And then what's the original concealment is what Heidegger is being, again, is being, and then it has different articulations because the question is, how do you understand physis, right? Very likely for someone like Heraclit, it is often translated as being still up until this day. And what's forgotten is this unity that any unconcealment requires concealment, and it finds different articulations throughout what we now call the history of philosophy. The original is the unity. That's the original, I would say. Or if in the German, it's Bergung that always already unfolds as Entbergung and Verbergung, unconcealment, concealment. And there is no word for Bergung in English. It's sheltering. Right? It doesn't translate well. Sorry, but let's stay on this, because I think that's because then we can maybe also get a better understanding of Grundsätze, why it is that thinking posits, if we get this carve this out a bit better. So I think, Madalina, you wanted to say something, right?
Yes, a lot, but that's been a lot of time, a long time. I mean, about concealment and about physis and cryptostai, and what I meant also about my question. But first, going back to what Octavian said and to the question of forgetting, I think that what Heidegger tries to say is that we have to understand concealment, as you also said, in a twofold way. Like there is original concealment, which is present at all times. And then there is a concealing of the concealment itself, which is the fact that man and thinking was not aware of the fact that there is a concealment. And that is the second level of concealment, so to say, what he calls forgetting. So he would try to unveil the original concealment by just, going out of this forgetfulness. But then this is still a matter of thinking, and this is still a matter of our relation to what is. But then I'm not sure whether in Heraclitus that would apply to being itself as Heidegger understands it, and only in relation to thinking. Because in that fragment of Physis Cryptostai Philei, Heidegger does not interpret it necessarily as something that would hide itself, but he says that physis as aufgehen, so as emergence as such, is always the relation between emergence and hiding itself. So physis is the relation between physis and cryptostai, so to say. But then there is a real question if the cryptostai in physis, so the concealment in physis, is one and the same with the concealment of being in relation to thinking. And that is, for example, one of the critiques that Michel Haar brings to Heidegger, because he says that he confounds the two concealments, and he reduces the original concealment of physis, he reduces it to the lethe of aletheia in relation to our thinking.
in how far does he? Can you say a bit more on that remark by Haar?
Well, it's a very, very brief remark, and he didn't develop it at all, but I'll indicate you the place afterwards if you want. But he's saying briefly that he confounds the two roots, fa and fu, like finestai and physis, and he says that he reduces physis to finestai, whereas we should rather interpret finestai itself from physis, from emergence out of itself. So, to resume, it would not be the fact of coming to light or the light, which would be primordial, but rather the play between light and darkness would have to be interpreted from a more original coming out of itself, which is physis.
But that's what Heidegger's doing, you know? Is he not? I mean, that's ultimately what he's always trying to say. No, I mean that there is this original unity of concealment and concealment. That's the thought. That's what he says. No, I'm not sure if I understand the question, because
Yes.
if the critique is that Heidegger does not think this original unity, then I think he does, or at least he attempts to. But if it's only on physis, then we would have to look at the physis interpretation. But so it's only on this fragment that says this.
Yes, and actually he says that, how should I put it, that there is a more original lethe than the one which includes only being and thinking, namely the emergence out of itself, and namely that Heidegger is trying to think that when he renounces to the vocabulary of being and beings in favor of the vocabulary of the earth and the world, which would not be synonymous to the other one.
Yeah. Okay.
In a sense.
Yeah. Huh. I'm not sure. I would probably have to read this passage and to say anything appropriate on it. But does Heidegger? I mean, well, I'm not sure I understand it correctly, but it sounds like Haar does away with the thinker. No, I mean, maybe I might get this completely wrong, but that's what you cannot do with Heidegger. There is no original unity of aletheia without the thinking being. That wouldn't be possible. But
well,
that's
exactly.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. That is the question, whether there is something, a certain concealment, which does not only depend on thinking. That would be the.
Yeah. No. I think not for Heidegger. So it's not dependent on thinking, but dependent on and in need of the thinking being, which is the human being. There is no being without human being. The being is not a self-contained, self-sufficient substance. That it needs the one who responds, and that's the thinker, the thinking being. Yeah. So that's not possible. And I think this is why he also mentions perianda somewhere in these talks about meditatan pan. Like, what is the original meditatio? Means to take everything that is into care and caring for and loving into consideration, because only then can there be. So there isn't a primordial slime, a concealment that occurs before the human being, as it were. It doesn't occur on its own. The relationship between being and human being is such that only insofar as there is the human being is there being, and the other way around too. So it always has to do with this response. And if not, then the trouble is, then what are we talking about? Because ultimately, what we're concerned with is question of meaning in history and question of of what it means to be, and also what it means to be human. And that is only in this. You cannot abstract away from the human being, I think. And if this is what Haar is doing, then so I haven't read it, so I can't say anything. But if that's what he's doing, that would not be what Heidegger is saying. However, what you can say perhaps is that, you know, the fact that we respond to it, for example, in this, well, we only have this fragment. Of course, we never know what the entire sentence was, right? Physis cryptis display could be anything, but we have this fragment and stick to it. That response speaks, of course, to this original occurring of concealment in being that's there. However, I would just qualify it as such and say it still needs the one who responds to this. Without this responding and articulation of it, it isn't in a full occurrence. Does that make sense? You see, so it could still occur as such, but it needs the one who responds and articulates, because without that, it's, what are we talking about, right? It's like these books, you know, the world without us. And who's watching these movies? It's us. I mean, so sorry. No?
No, not in this sense. But then I will let Bogdan say something.
No. Just, yeah, okay, Bogdan, but then respond to me, okay?
It was not in this naive sense, of course.
I know.
The world without us, but maybe, and that was also the thought of Fink, Eugen Fink, and the way he was trying to respond to Heidegger. Maybe thinking in its relation to being can see that there is something going beyond, so to say, this relation. Thinking can see that there is something which exceeds this relation itself. And if you want, but that just as a small joke or in a very naive sense, I would ask you if a rose needs your thinking to be a rose and to flourish, like as such. Whereas there is a certain concealment and unconcealment in the way it emerges out of itself. But as I said, in a very naive way this time. But,
yeah, we have to be careful because then we sound like Berkeley or something, right?
No, of course.
But yes, the rose flourishes, but the one who calls it flourishing is still the human being. That's not to say the human being is the center of history, not at all. But there is something peculiar about the human being, because the way in which we respond is, and that is a bit crass to say, it should lead to this, but it's in such a way that we are the living being that extracts vast amounts of energy from the earth. We are responding to possibilities of being in such a way, which so you know the rose will flourish, but it needs but even just the word flourishing is something that comes out of a language. It will flourish on its own, but it's, you know, the trouble with abstraction is that we can always abstract away from anything. We can always say, but what if there's a possible world where elephants are pink? I know you're not saying this, but it could go in this direction. I'm not saying the rose needs us to flourish, but for the rose to flourish in the sense of language, it needs us, yes, and we need the rose. Bogdan, sorry, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, it's not so important. I mean, of course, this is the phenomenological experience of the noesis and noema. If we go back to Husserl, they're both together. I mean, it's that is the primordial Unterschied, the primordial difference which we have. Okay, so we cannot think back and say, how would the world be without us? I mean, it's, as you said, we can make this sterile experiment to think how would it be without us or something like this, but it's we start always from the fact that it is us and the thinking and being are, this is, and that's what I think it comes very nice to the fore in the conferences, this is Verhältnis, no? So this fact that as I said, perhaps everything can be brought together in this prefix an. Okay, so das Sein spricht an das Denken. I mean, this is always this connection, this delicate connection between being and thinking, that they both need together. So, I mean, this is for Heidegger the ultimate experience, and tries to find its traces in Greek philosophy. Okay, so in Parmenides, for example, in Noein kai einai. So and I would say just to finish that when I'm looking at Heraclitus and these two fragments, Madalina, this is fragment 16, okay, Tomedion pote potentis latoi, and the fragment 123, Physis testai philei. So I would say Heidegger's, and I think in his interpretation to Heraclitus, Heidegger says that the gateway to Heraclitus is fragment 16 because he is focusing on aletheia. So I would say, in answering to Michel, I would say for Heidegger, the access to physis is through aletheia and not the other way around. Okay, and you would say now that R would reply, or even Fink would reply that there is something which is in a way before this, but yeah, I don't know what to say about this. I mean, yeah,
exactly, but it's addressing us, right? There is no fragment of Heraclitus without Heraclitus, without someone having thought this.
Mm-hmm. So
even just saying, is there a more primordial, is already this layer of abstraction that we cannot say that, this is almost the same logic as that logic of the possible world in which there are no humans. What if the world didn't exist? The abstraction can go to extreme lengths. And I would almost say with what I hear about Hahn and some of his critiques, it's almost like this is the self-certainty of the subject reversed. Or this is the apocalypse of the subject. This is the dark side of it. It's like, oh no, there's complete utter uncertainty. There's nothing to hold on to. This is exactly what Heidegger wants to get away from also at the post-structuralist, postmodernist project, which is anti-logos, anti-focus, anti-human ultimately. It's to me, it is an abstraction to say what is before in this sense, because we are responding to an original inceptual response to this which occurs, but it occurs for, right? This is why Heidegger speaks of giving and the gift of being. When you take this seriously, it's gifting itself, and it's gifting itself to us, and it's upon us, not upon anything else or anyone else. It's upon us to respond to this original unity, so that there isn't an utter forgetfulness, and we don't end up in Gestell. Yeah.
If I may, I would just like to add something to this discussion about the relation between being and thinking, and point out to a distinction that Heidegger makes. So coming back to Madalina's example of the rose that needs us or doesn't need us for it to bloom. And as Johannes very well said, indeed, it needs us in order to bloom, because otherwise it cannot be called like that. So it needs us in a way, but in another way needs us a stepping stone, or a step. It's Heidegger's example, the Treppe, Steintreppe. So is this difference between what is brought out of concealment that Heidegger introduces, between what is brought in the manner of the physis, which he calls das hervorgebrachte, and that which is brought forth in the manner of These, herständige. In this last one, it is that the forgetting becomes complete when it becomes herstellen in the technique. And, I'd say so. I think it is interesting.
Stay with that. Can you say a bit more? I think that's. Do you want to say more?
Yeah. So Heidegger in the Gefahr again. It's this place that I'm having in I'm looking at right now, and he says that is this difference between Anwesende, that is made, produced, hergestellt, by the human deed, and what it's brought forth from the physis. And I was thinking that this human deed that puts something that becomes ständig, that becomes stable, is the one in which forgetting of the essence of being is completed when this Herstellen becomes as such in the technique. When the essence of beings, it's not Ding sein, it's not Gegenstand sein, but it's Bestandsein, so a part of the mechanism. So in this, this human did this thesis is the one that I wouldn't say degenerates, but I would say that leads to this total forgetting of the essence of being in producing parts of the mechanism, Bestand.
Which is a forgetting of the forgetting, and which is clearly the project of positivism. That posits the world as positively there, and positively available.
Sorry, how is really naively put, but how is forgetting supposed to, how is it possible in the belonging together? I think Bogdan alluded to this when he said that being sort of lives its own tale, and so I mean, where does this occurrence of forgetfulness, we don't even have to think about the extreme technical forgetfulness, just the mild forgetfulness, any forgetfulness. Which I suppose Heidegger would say every thesis is a form of forgetting, because it forgets its upgrund. I don't know, but where in this belonging together do you have, or how could you explain forgetfulness like this? Because this is a question, really, just to finish, I think this is a very ethical question. And it's a question about ethical in the sense of, if you like, of ethos, of how humans are and how they are to comport themselves, to act, to make decisions. And yeah, that's it.
Would you say, Johannes, or?
No.
This is also a very difficult question. In order to understand you better, Raluca, you're asking how can forgetfulness happen in a way? This is the question.
Yes, exactly.
Because there is a primordial communion
belonging.
Belong together.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I think Heidegger would say that this is the part played by Denken. I mean, this is the destiny of Denken, the fate of Denken, that it is always focusing on something in a way. I mean, it's kind of so difficult to articulate. In focusing on something and bringing only something to light, because it always plays between this difference and the one and the many in a way. I mean, it's connected to the essence of the logos in Heidegger's understanding. That is the problem, because it's always a begründen, and this is mysterious. I mean, I don't know why Heidegger says this. Why Denken is always ein Grundlegen. This is always ein begründen and ein ergründen, trying to lay a ground, to look for a ground, to have something stable to stay upon. And by doing so, it's kind of focusing on this ground and losing this withdrawal of the being, and that's how forgetting begins. But on the other side, as Heidegger says, this is also because on the other side, being withdraws. It has this movement of withdrawing, of giving something and withdrawing. And so the problem, if there is a problem, it lies with both in a way, that Heidegger says already in his Plato lecture from 1931 on Plato. I mean, this is for the first time I encountered it chronologically in Heidegger. It is not a question of humanity being responsible for a forgetting, but it's also because being withdraws. So this is what I said, that it's a double responsibility in a way here. Because also, in order for you to forget something, let's take a pure ontological forgetting, just like we forget every day. I mean, I'm not the only responsible for forgetting something. It's kind of, reality is built like this, that it encourages me to forget. Let's say the example with an umbrella. I take an umbrella with me because it's raining, okay, and then I take a train, and then it stops raining, and then I get out of the train and I forget my umbrella in the train because it doesn't rain anymore. And I say, damn it, why doesn't it rain anymore? Exactly because it doesn't rain, that's why I forget my umbrella. I mean, it's not only my fault that I'm forgetting an umbrella, it's also the fault of the rain, that it stops raining, okay? So I'm kind of, I should be attentive. I should be always focused on the umbrella, but I cannot be focused all my life on an umbrella. I have to be focused on a plurality of things because life is plural. Okay, I cannot hold in my whole life in my focus on umbrella. I have to focus on many things, and I rely on reality that it can remind me of something. But reality doesn't remind me of something because reality is plural. Because there's not only rain, there's also sunshine, and so of this Zusammenspiel, of this playing together, I forget the umbrella. And I mean, I need reality to remind me a new rain when I'm out of the train, and I said, well, I need an umbrella. Well, where's my umbrella? And then, because rain has come back again. But so, and in fact, I think it's interesting that Heidegger focuses so much on forgetting, because this is the only point where you can attack modern subjectivity. Because always when you say, it's stupid to say, you should never say, I forget. We never say in present, I forget, because it's not an action. I'm not forgetting. I have forgotten. I always say I have forgotten. That is in the past. This is something which I realize now, that it happens in the past when I wasn't there. I wasn't aware of the fact that I forget. So I never say, and actually in Romanian, we never say in present, I forget, because this is not an action of the subject. I'm not responsible. And no subject whatsoever would try to forget, because it's not in your power to do this. You cannot actually propose yourself to forget. It's impossible. You have to be taken by surprise, to be unaware. And this is the point where you see the limit of the subject, because there is something uncontrollable. Because subject is always focused on controlling something. Yes. You cannot, when you try to control the whole of it, then you give up grounding, because you have to. Exactly. I'm stopping.
At least the subject that's purely in its subjectivity, right? Not the subject of Kant or Hegel, and especially not the Kant of the third critique, the sublime, experience of nature, etc. That's not a control subject. But there is this tendency of subjectivity to, as Heidegger then puts it, Subjektivität. He makes up this word, subjectivity. And I think the question, though, by Luca, I mean, if I may, it seems to imply that without having all data, we cannot have an ethical life. We must solve all problems a priori, and then we can live together well. If we forget, then no. But if we forget, then we cannot live ethically. Was that implied in the question?
No, not. I think we can leave the ethical aspect beside, because maybe it complicates the question. But it wasn't like this. I didn't at all want to imply that we have to have this knowledge of total data in order to make an ethical decision. It just seems to me that forgetfulness is, to translate what Bogdan said, is like something that is affecting the human being and kind of makes it what it is. And because maybe it's related to its finitude, to the fact that it has to focus on so many things, that it rains, sometimes it stops to rain, I don't know. But what I wanted to say is that maybe when Heidegger tries to pull out the human being out of this forgetfulness, maybe this is an ethical gesture for it to have an ethical relation with being, which is not one of forgetting, right?
Yeah, okay, yes, that's good. I would try and respond like this. I don't think that Heidegger wants to get rid of forgetting, but to remind the control subject of forgetting, which the subject forgets. Mm-hmm. It's a reminder. And hence also the passage that we read in the Phaedrus here, in German, he speaks of nicht für das Gedächtnis, sondern für das Erinnern. So, I don't know what this would be in English, but sorry, did you know? So not for memory, but for remembering is something that you generated here with handwriting or with scripture. Sorry, and I think what if anything, then Heidegger is just a reminder of the mere fact of the need to forget. And to give an extremely ontic example, there are these cases of human beings who don't forget, right? Who remember every single second of every single day. They are very often, they're very good in some areas, like stock market, but they're completely incapable of, not really, but they're completely incapable of living a normal life.
I think Borges has a story with this kind of character. His name is Funes. Borges,
Borges, yeah.
He has this story with Funes, who cannot forget, so he cannot speak because he's caught in a perpetual new impression that he cannot. I mean, language for Borges is the form of forgetting, let's say. Because, yeah.
Yes, Simon Crick, briefly, and then Alex, was it you who wanted to say something? I'll be quiet. Who wanted to say something? Am I hearing voices now? Might be. Okay. Simon Critchley has a book, I forgot the title of it, from about, 10 years ago. So he says the information age allows us not to forget. It forbids us forgetting. And that makes us incapable of acting. And the argument is much more refined than my brief summary here, but that's just as someone who's thought about forgetting in the digital age. And maybe you could spin this even here in Heidegger as this, right? That truth becomes certainty. Certainty means perfect storable memory of everything, data sets, etc. Fooling itself to know and have control of everything. And then Heidegger is the reminder that what's at work in everything is forgetting.
Can I just try to answer my own question, because
that's the best questions.
I think if you would put the same question to Plato, he would say something like, the fact that human beings forget being is only possible to see after philosophy has emerged, after somebody who is a philosopher has actually asked the question, TST. If you don't have the question, you will never see this forgetfulness. So it's philosophy that makes this forgetfulness appear in its brightness. So, and this poses a lot of questions, because so how do you, if it's a historical occurrence, what do you do with the ontological concealment, which makes possible all types of forgetting? I mean, philosophy is a historical event, or is it? You see my point, or?
Yes. Maybe a response to this would be yes, after philosophy, but also that philosophy itself becomes, necessary with the, as we said before, with the disappearance of myth, and trying to find stability, right? I mean, this is what the human being, I think, always does, is trying to find something to hold on to. And this can be the calculations and machinations of Gestell in terms of evaluations. What's good is what's evaluated as good in aggregated sense. That's a way we find hold in existence. And maybe more to your question, I think it's, yes, I think Plato would probably, maybe a philosopher of this time would agree with this, but that doesn't deny its necessity, no? Or I'm not sure if I understand the question then correctly. It's,
yeah, I think it's, I mean, in the sense that philosophy is a historical event, and it also seems to be the discovery of the question of being. Obviously, if this question is historical, then it's not necessary, or is it? Or I don't know.
It's not historical. I mean, this is the beginning of history. I mean, in Heidegger's view. I mean, the occurrence, so the manifestation of the forgetfulness of the how do you call it, the communality, the Zusammengehören of being and thinking, when this thing manifests itself, it is like, that's the beginning of Geschichte, of not of history as he called it. I mean, you know the word, the Geschichte. Huh? So this is the beginning of the unfolding, the Arche, in effect.
Yeah.
And this manifestation is for Heidegger very complicated, because it has this movement of giving itself but still withdrawing, and then leaving something behind which is not being but a plurality of beings, and then the quest for it, and then looking for something which is not the real withdrawal but just the being of the beings, and then the long destiny of 2,500 years, and then the ultimate peril in it happens, and then somebody like Heidegger comes and says, no, people, this is more complicated, and we should go out of this complete forgetfulness and try to regain the primordial arche. So this is this big drama here, which is unfolding here. So I mean, for Heidegger, this is the drama of the Verhältnis. That's how I perceive it. The Verhältnis is the relation, the holding together on being and thinking. This is for Heidegger what we have, all what we have, as I can.
Yeah, and sorry, but even this point about the contingency of philosophy, I mean, to quote Heidegger at some point refers to Marx and says that Marx said, oh, philosophers have thought about the world, that they failed to change the world, and then he points out, well, this is, by the way, a philosophical standpoint, right? I mean, even what you, this again is an example to me of abstraction. What if philosophy hadn't happened? Well, we don't know. Right? We just don't know. But again, there's a difference between mere Historie, that everything can be a contingent event, or Geschichte, which is a deep relationship that grants meaning. And those who engage in anti-logos discourses still are completely dependent upon the logos. They couldn't.
Aristotle made this point in Protreptikos. I mean, he says this is this famous argument that if you philosophize, you philosophize. If you don't want to philosophize, you have to philosophize in order to show that you don't philosophize. So you always philosophize. And this is the force of the Arche, of the Ursprung. When it comes, it changes everything. You cannot even think before how it was before it. Even if you try to think what was before it, you use the same terms of philosophy. It is like a bomb exploding in all directions. It opens up history, it opens up past and future and present. This is opened at the same time on all three dimensions. You cannot say, let's think back before the Arche. Okay, you can do this, but you can do it in the terms of the Arche. You're not.
Yes.
This is what we have. We have today the realm of the communality of being and thinking. This is the ultimate ground we have. I mean, this is and this drama, this unfolding drama of 2,500 years. And this is, I mean, Heidegger says this explosion of, I don't mean it as an atomic bomb, but this explosion is now encompassing the whole Earth in a way. The whole humanity is taken by this drama between being and thinking in a way. I think that's the way he puts the problem.
I totally agree. I just maybe I'm missing something, but to me, again, comparing with Plato, I think for Plato, the tragedy that not all humans are philosophers is evident, and he doesn't have a project to in order to make all humans philosophers. Mm-hmm. While in Heidegger we have this idea now that we are living an epoch of forgetting, and the technical world is the epitome of forgetting, and this seems to involve everybody, philosophers and non-philosophers, as if to be human is to be philosopher. I think Madalina asked this yesterday, exactly this. And I lost what I wanted to say, but
what did Madalina ask yesterday?
If thinking is measured by philosophy, if I'm not mistaken. No.
Oh, yeah.
So for Plato, just to make it more clear, for Plato, it's obvious that not everybody can become a philosopher, and this has certain consequences. For Heidegger, is it the same? Or because of this arche which exploded with Thales, we can no longer speak of humans without philosophy, without the exigence of
we can never speak of humans without it. Again, this would be an abstraction. Then you would say, what would be without it? That's not possible. You can make up these mind games, but look, for Heidegger specifically, what he says is that, you know, he speaks of the end of philosophy. That's another big issue that we can spend another week on this, and the beginning of thinking, the inception of thinking. This is an essay he wrote, very 50s, I think, or a talk he gave, and for Heidegger, he speaks of the few and the rare in contributions. So yes, it's not upon everyone, but still, what's strange is that this way of thinking that begins with the Greeks or Athenians or whatever, or in the Greek language, let's just say, we'll put it like this perhaps, is that this ultimately leads to post Descartes, post Kant, post Hegel, to, silly example, to the radio that everyone can use and no one knows how it functions.
The vacuum cleaner is also discussed here.
The vacuum cleaner.
Yeah, he says we have.
I don't remember that one.
Use the vacuum cleaner. No, it's here. The Staubsauger. we can use the vacuum cleaner because we have the common ground of thinking and being. I mean, this is what he says.
I mean, yes, but it sounds so silly, but that's it's massive when you try and accept the thought. I would just that, as I said yesterday, thought thinks itself anyways, right? And when we participate in it, it's the question how we respond to it that really matters. Because if we don't, then there is this utter blindness and numbness to being. And then, I don't know if Heidegger does not have a notion of the philosopher king or anything like this, but there is a profound responsibility upon the thinkers, or he says artists, poets, anyone in touch with I don't know, a certain meaning of an epoch. But ultimately also, there is in Heidegger the possibility for a community of mortals when you think of the text in the fourfold. So it's not just the lonely thinker that thinks, and thanks to that thinker the world makes sense or something like this. It's I think there's a distinct possibility for him also for communities to form and to initiate a relationship with death, such that the human being is no longer a rather destructive force as the human being is now. Sorry, Bogdan,
No.
I think you wanted to say something as well, and
No, I don't want to say nothing.
Let's just stay with nothing then. I'm kidding.
In continuation of what you just said, I was puzzled by the fact. There are certain domains in which one wants full control. One wants full control because with full control one can achieve the purposes of that domain. In other domains, one does not want full control because, for example, in improvising a guitar song, you want full control there will impede your purpose in a way. So in some domains you want it, in some domains you don't. There is another type of situation like the political situation where you have two distinct purposes. The leader, for example, wants full control, but that comes into conflict with, political principles, or the citizen who does not want to be fully controlled. So we kind of have three types of situations as far as I can think of right now. What I was asking is, from what perspective is full control in the modern technological sense bad in a way, or undesirable for the human being? Is it that by way of full control, the human being cannot achieve something? Is it that it misses out on something? What exactly is the thing by virtue of which full control is undesirable?
What do you think yourself, Octavian?
Well, my intuition, which I don't know how much it resonates with the little I know of Heidegger, is that through full control, one can achieve a lot, but one also misses a way of being with himself and the world. So it's not that one cannot achieve things, it's that one, in a way, his existence loses something like alienation or something like that. So this is how I would explain it to myself, but this is why I asked the question. I want to verify this intuition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good question. Anyone wants to answer this up?
I think what we lose is the capacity to be philosophers, and this is the problem for Heidegger. This would be my answer.
My 2 cents on that would be that we don't lose the capacity of being philosopher. It's precisely what we gain. We gain the capacity of being philosopher, but not thinkers, as Heidegger says. No? So we become metaphysicians, if you want, technical metaphysicians.
Ja, genau, analytische Philosophen.
But I wouldn't formulate it quite in these terms as Octave did. I mean in this terms like full control is bad or is harmful. We're losing something, because I'm not sure that Heidegger would say that the full control is bad. I haven't seen that anywhere that it's bad. Mm-hmm. It's precisely a way of the essence of being, or this cannot be as the essence of being something bad. This is the essence of being, and Gestalt is the essence of being, and technique is the essence of being in this precise epoch of this historical development of being. So I'm not sure if I would go in that direction of thinking this in terms of bad, useful, wrong, right?
Mm-hmm. From a political point of view, one can think of the Rectoratsrede, from 1933, the discourse, the rectoral discourse. And in it, especially at the end, Heidegger says exactly that the leader has to be contested by the Gefolgschaft. I mean, he uses kind of Nazist vocabulary there, but I think the background is still Heraclitean and Greek. And that's what he says, that you, in a political way, control is bad because the leader wants to control, and the Gefolgschaft and the people who follow should oppose fiercely the leader. So that is, it should also ensue a polemos, a kind of fruitful Auseinandersetzung of conflict, because when you lose the conflict, then you lose the essence of being, in a way. It's the essence of polemos of and whereas control, it aims at eliminating polemos, at eliminating conflict in a way. So at this point, Heidegger is very Greek as in his nature. He's very competitive, and he always speaks about great deeds and great facts and fighting and all those stuff. I mean, that's why control is. It should be avoided in a way, because it's contrary to the essence of being. As Heidegger tries to think the essence of being.
Contrary to polemos, to war as the father of everything. Yes, I mean, it's a very good question, Bogdan. It's I would just also say with Alex, it's not about a moral stance or judgment, but this is bad and we should rather do this in a normative sense. But it would be on maybe on the level of being, it would mean to work against being in some sense, and that's bound to come back to haunt us, because if being is ultimately this unity, if the truth of being is the unity of concealment and unconcealment, then working against concealment with the Lichtdimension der Vernunft, or the light dimension of reason that forgets darkness, etc., then that would imply that something comes back to haunt us, and actually it is a destructive power. I think he would go as far as saying this, right, that we do become quite destructive, and that we now have the power, as he sometimes says, to destroy the planet by the push of a button. He says that the atomic bomb exploded 500 years before it actually did, when Descartes said, rebelled against being, which is to posit being. So again, we have the word of setzen. Wenn der Mensch setzt das Sein, und in dem Moment, in dem er das Sein setzt, in the moment he posits being, he tries to overpower being, and this overpowering will lead to, if you like, an imbalance in this primordial war, and this imbalance will ultimately disequilibrate, that even is a verb, everything that is. So it's to and on a to go away from Heidegger. What's lacking in a world that's totally controlled is an access to the divine, is an access to the, these words are very empty at this point, but to the spiritual. It's no longer a poetic world. It's also not a world of freedom, right? And we are experiencing this right now. We are in lockdown because of an invisible enemy, so-called. The French president is at war with this invisible enemy. So we've lost freedom for fighting something that ultimately cannot be controlled. A virus will always come. And it's this attempt, even just the notion, this is completely beyond Heidegger now, but even just the notion of saving lives is weird, if you think about it, because what can be done is that lives can be extended by the quantity of years, but ultimately death will win. And yeah, so. And also, just from a personal perspective, when you think about it, when you try to control, when you want something to be, or for even in a relationship, for someone to be in a certain way, it's that exercise of control that will make people run away from you, just in a very simplistic manner of saying this, right? Or in a teacher-student relationship, the teacher that just said, and this is the truth, only this, you will not listen. It's trying to control the student and that relationship, and it will just evaporate. It won't be a space for learning. And yeah.
What I find so nice in Heidegger is that it's so provocative. I mean, even if some people say that it has kind of sorcerer in himself, or something that makes you become a slave of his thinking. I mean, if you really read his texts, you are really encouraged to criticize, or to not accept this, or just to contradict him. I mean, it's because he is himself. I mean, it makes you really mad sometimes in the way in which he understands Plato or Hegel or some kind of thinker which you like, and which you read in your own way, and you see Heidegger violently inserting things in this thinker, and it makes you mad in a way. But I would say, I never experienced this. I mean, Heidegger is a thinker of conflict. I mean, it's always like this. If you really read his text, I mean, it's. I stumbled upon a page in his. He had a meeting with students in Zurich in the 50s, I think, and the students asked him. He was already very famous, and one student asked him, how do you see your own affirmations, as we should follow them, or we should yeah, which just like as if your affirmations were something godlike. And Heidegger says, I think the best way to approach my affirmations, it would be that they are fragwürdig, that they are worthy of questioning. I mean, that's how Heidegger would like to his sentences to be read, something which provokes questions. I mean, why is this so? And I find it very nice that he never said follow my sentences or abide to them or something like that. He just question them. I find it.
Hier wird nicht geheidegert. We don't Heideggerianize here. Apparently, he said that too. But also, you know, when a philosopher takes a clear affirmative position, and then also is available for public talks or discussion groups, etc. You know, when someone actually has taken a position, that's when the question, I think, can arise too. Because if it's all just, you know, is it this or is it that? It's bit maybe not, if it's too up for discussion, what someone or someone's thoughtful position is, but it's against this position or in opposition to it that a question arises. And also that one's own position becomes perhaps clearer, right? I mean, ultimately, this could lead us, this could be a segue, as they say, into the question of Verhältnis. No, because it is the relationship between being and man is also in a certain being, you know, being herausgefordert, challenged by it. And so is perhaps also this between a thinker like Heidegger and his readers, challenge. We are to respond to it.
If I may add also, have you noticed that there is in the whole conferences, in the 5 conferences, this is only one phrase which is how do you call it, italic, written with italics.
Really? That's rare.
Yeah, this is on page 175 in the fifth the 5th conference, and I think it would be nice if we can close our seminar with this phrase, if you comply. It says, "Wir bleiben auf dieser Erde im verhältnismäßig angesiedelt," and in English is "we remain settled upon this earth in relationality." And I find it interesting, but because you said about Verhältnis, because I think this is the ultimate word of these conferences, for myself at least. This idea of the Verhältnis, of the double thinking and being. Okay, so and is it not so that in German Verhältnismäßig means also relative? It's in the common German it is Verhältnismäßig. It's kind of, it's not how would you use the word Verhältnismäßig in normal German?
Normally, yes, but I'm not sure it's a relative in that sense here, right?
Here's of course not. Here is coming from Verhältnis. We are living in how did you translate? Relationality. I mean,
yes, but even that is I don't know. What do you make of Verhältnismäßig?
Yeah, I mean, I think Heidegger plays a bit with it because it's at the end, and I think he wants also to hear the philosophical meaning of Verhältnis, Verhältnismäßig, namely having the mass, the measure of the Verhältnis, of the relation.
Yeah.
But on the other side, I think he also, I have to, he also refers to the common normal meaning for Verhältnismäßig. That's why I asked you, how do you use in normal German for Verhältnismäßig? It's something relative. It depends on the point of view. Is it right?
Sorry, I was just taking notes of it depends on the point of view. Well, in what sense? I'm not sure. For Heidegger, you think it?
No, I mean,
no.
As I said, for Heidegger, it's clear that Heidegger here's now the Verhältnis here, the measure of the Verhältnis is Verhältnismäßig. Yeah. But I also think that he's because it's at the end of the conferences and he now comes back to a normal, let's say, to speaking in a normal way. I think he also wants us to hear in Verhältnismäßig the normal German meaning of the word Verhältnismäßig, which as I recall in German, means, well, it depends. Es ist verhältnismäßig groß. It depends on the point of view if you perceive it as being big or small. Is it right, so?
Yes, but yeah, but I mean, it's weird how he ends this, right? He says he's not about, he doesn't want, it's not about Recht behalten. It's not about being right or winning the argument, you could say. And then and the last sentence of this is, man muss die Leute nicht am Ärmel ziehen. The very last sentence. I don't know what this is. What is it in English? One does not have to pull the people by the...
He says, one must not take people by the sleeve.
Okay, that's good to know that idiom. I didn't know that. But still, I would think that the Verhältnis, wir sind auf dieser Erde angesiedelt, im Verhältnismäßigen, in the measure of that which grants hold. And then we have, so I think it is about finding a hold on the earth, which is not about being correct about the Grundsätze, about the principles of thinking in this mere abstracted theoretical way, but perhaps in a way that we find the measure between between the, it's a weird way of ending it, between the thought that's at stake and what else is a bit too, I'm not finding the right words now. That's something that's what else there is, sort of what other possibilities of being perhaps there are also, which have remained hidden, but that was a bit too broad, so I have to come back to this in a bit. What does anyone else think about verhältnismäßig, or what Heidegger might mean by this?
I was right in thinking that he also uses or thinks at the about the normal use of verhältnismäßig, because he says he's speaking about absolute. So the contrary of absolute is relative. Okay, so he says at the end, und dies dann heißt absolut. So in a way, if you want to, dann ist eben das Verhältnismäßige das Absolute. Richtig, doch bleibt die Frage. So, I mean, the normal people would say, Heidegger, what are you teaching us? That we are living in relative, you're teaching us relativeness, relativity, okay? And so Heidegger says, oh, okay, if you want to use this Schlagwort, these slogans, then yeah, this is the absolute. The absolute is the relative. Yeah, but of course, as I said, this is only the most superficial meaning of what he says, because verhältnismäßig is the measure of the verhältnis. You want to say, Raluca?
I think Madalina wants to say something, and I was the only one who caught sight.
Sorry.
Yeah, I read this verhältnismäßig as an adjective that he's using in the same way as ereignishaft, for example, or something like this. So it is something of the order of verhältnis, so to say. And I think we shouldn't forget, while we're reading these lines, the question of language and the one of ground, towards which Alex was pointing a couple of hours ago, namely the fact that actually during all these pages, he's saying that the ultimate Abgrund is language, because language would be one and the same with Ereignis, and language would be actually the Verhältnis itself between being and thinking. And then maybe he's trying to say, well, when I, Heidegger, when I'm saying this, I'm not trying to substitute one ground for another, like the metaphysical ground with language, which would be another principle, another ground in a metaphysical sense. But I'm talking about something completely different, because language is not a ground in the same way in which the other one would be. And in this sense, it was never going to be an absolute, as for the metaphysics.
Exactly.
But then it would be very interesting, I think, to discuss about this role of language that Heidegger, or the role Heidegger attributes to language as a relation itself between thinking and being.
Yeah, very good remarks. I think it is around that time, a bit later, Heidegger says publicly also that he thought when he was younger that you need to make up words. And then when he got older, he noticed that we actually have to do is to go back to root terms or Leitworte, Grundworte, der einfachen Sprache, of simple language. He also becomes interested in dialect, vernacular, dialect, etc. too. He begins to read Hebel, sorry. And yes, he says here, just to add to what you just said, is that this terminology can no longer, this saying can no longer use the terminology of metaphysics. It must speak of a different language, and it must, well, it must, I mean, this, in order to not give, as you said, another stable or permanent timeless ground, but in order to achieve what? To achieve the thinking of Ereignis then. Is that what's it?
I don't know, because then we could go back to the question of Raluca and ask, why is there an ethical stake in all that? Why do this?
Yeah. Does anyone want to answer that? I can try. But
I think maybe because we are already doing this, and what is because it's our basic stand toward what there is, and we cannot be without response to Ereignis. And why should we do this as Heidegger invites us, is precisely because we will do this aware, and we will be more explicit in a way, more thoughtful.
I mean, yes, ultimately, maybe there is, you know, not maybe, I would probably think that there is an ethical dimension to this. Here's a weird example. Heidegger was very fond of Franz Beckenbauer, right? The football player. Because Beckenbauer revolutionized the game. He was the first what we now call libero, someone who played himself free in the game, which had become overly strategical and controlled. He was the first to bypass that. And he actually very often apparently went to his neighbors to watch Beckenbauer play because he didn't have a television. But so it's, yes, I think there is an ethical dimension, because the crossroads, he says this, you know, he always exaggerates a bit, but there's a crossroads, which is either towards the world of machines or towards the world of humans. The world of machines would be Gestell produces human beings in factories according to its needs. He says this in the Richard Wisse discussion too. And then the other direction would be the homo humanus, the human being, as he calls it in Latin, humanism, or a world fit for humans. Not a world of Gestell, of the unheimliche Redewerk, as Nietzsche calls it, of eerie, the eerie wheelwork. And just to add to what Vasile said, is we're responding, according to Heidegger, we're responding to our Ereignis anyways. And now that it's flashed in its clarity, we're even more asked to respond to it, so that there can be, to paraphrase, to quote from Hölderlin, there can be a measure on the earth. Heidegger says, by the way, at the end of contributions, that Sprache ist dieses Maß. Language is the measure of the earth. Yeah. But you know, relationality, you could also maybe just mention very briefly, the fourfold is a world of measure and also of relationality, of Verhältnismäßigkeit, where the human being is in a Verhältnis with the earth as a dwelling ground, and with the sky as a limit, and with the unnamed divinities as a reminder to their own mortality.